Good morning. My name is Matthew Fox, and I'm glad to be here with Jerry Maynard, who wrote the afterword to my new book, The Tao of Thomas Aquinas, Fierce Wisdom for Hard Times. And Jerry is an activist from Houston who very much admires the work and spirit of Dorothy Day and others who have passed through the Catholic worker movement. And he's done his own share of protesting and going to jail and the rest. So real happy to have him as an ally. And welcome, Jerry. I think Jerry wants to begin with a song by Thomas Aquinas, so we'll turn it over to Jerry. What's up, Jerry?
Thank you, Matt. It's been exciting and fun working on this project with you on Aquinas. I think when I talked about this book with people, they're like, what does that mean, that Thomas Aquinas, the Tao of Thomas Aquinas? And I had to tell them to say, this is the authentic Aquinas. This is the real Aquinas that we were never allowed to see because he's too real, he's too relatable. So I think one of the great gifts about this book is that we get to really relate to a medieval saint who, as this book has shown, is very revolutionary. So it's a timely work. Thomas wrote a lot. He not just theology, but he also wrote some hymns that were eventually set to music. And this one I wanted to start with because I think the words, the English words of them, are very, very telling. It's called, the Latin name of it is Totum Ergo Sacramentum, which this translation in English says, let us humbly voice, as the English translation, which I don't think is necessarily very accurate, but it's good. I want to start with this because I think it really sets up for us our conversation, and it's also a part of Aquinas that I think is important to lift up because the arts are really a key to the work that we're trying to do. So here it is. Humbly let us voice our homage for so great a sacrament. Let all former rights surrender to the Lord's New Testament. What our senses fail to fathom, let us grasp through faith's consent. Tatum ergo sacramentum, veneremur cenui, et antiquum documentum novo cedat ritui, prestet fides supplementum, se suum defectui. The part about that I really like is the line that says, let all former rights surrender to the Lord's New Testament. Where our senses fail to fathom, let us grasp through faith's consent. I think that's awesome. Because this book is showing us the wisdom that we need for right now. We need newer rites. We need newer forms of worship. We need to go deeper beyond where our senses fail us and find deeper wisdom in what we're trying to do in our world today. And so that all that we do in the work for justice is grounded in that sacred wisdom. So to begin, I want to read part of my afterword, Matt, if that's okay, and then we'll go into some dialogue. How does that sound?
That's fine. Thank you for the music. never heard you sing before. You have a nice voice.
Thank you.
Got all the notes right. But I like your exegesis too, that the application you made of that 13th century hymn to our 21st century struggle. And it's both your wisdom and Aquinas's that flows as a nice opening to our discussion. So go right to your afterword and what you want to derive from that, share with us.
So this part of the afterword, it begins on page 207. It says, I want to get us an idea of who we're talking about when we talk about Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas, like many sages and prophets, has often been ignored to the point that his life becomes but a footnote in history, or his message is watered down to the point that the potency of his words is drowned out of existence. However, in this timely work, Matthew Fox has revived Aquinas for our time and given him a framework that allows all of us to recognize that this message is the instrument that will give our weary world a new song of liberation. I think that's what we're working with. This book showcases that this medieval mystic and theologian has really set us up to really tackle the work that we need to do in a thoughtful, meaningful, and liberating way. And I think that's it's just awesome. It's wonderful. And what I think we're really trying to do here in this book and with both our work and the work of many other people in the past and in the present is, as you say in chapter 1, we're democratizing mysticism. You know, we're bringing the sacred back down and reminding each other that the incarnation needs to be taken seriously. That what we're doing here right now, what we're grasping right now is we're trying to be reminded and to practice that this present moment is sacred. We need to honor that. We don't need to spend all our time in church or in monasteries to find the divine. The divine's here in the moment. You know, this moment is a gift. That's why we call it the present moment. So I think how we do that is just, you know, we bring it back down. We don't keep the sacred on a shelf. We let it mingle with us. And, so
yes, and how every day the sacred is, if we're open to it.
Yeah.
If and that is Aquinas is certainly his position. You see that all of creation is unveiling the divine to us, is revelation. Revelation is not just found in the Bible book, but in all creation, as he says. Mm-hmm. And that means, it's everywhere. It's in all our relationships, as Lakota would say. And that means relationship with other humans, but also with the rest of creation, with the universe itself. And it's a worldview that we certainly lost in the modern era, mm-hmm. but that deserves to return. And even what we're going through this crisis today, the coronavirus, now we're beginning to slow things down, and we're locking whole cities shut. Yeah. And a lot of things are changing very swiftly. It doesn't mean we won't go back to what we were doing, but meanwhile, there's this awakening, perhaps, mm-hmm. that our busy lives and all this are not the last word. And in fact, now we're hearing that this slowing down of the economies all over the world may be the best thing for global warming and climate change that we're capable of. So that kind of flips the picture a little too. So it's really revolutionary to realize that at a time like this, we're in a moment of going silent, and and not just going about our everyday business, but going deeper, hopefully, in our everyday business, and therefore winnowing what's really important. What's really important, and that's what crises, bring to us, is to kind of shake us loose from our suppositions and go deeper, like Howard Thurman says, we become stripped to the literal substance of ourselves before God. And this Aquinas is really talking about too, when he says to approach every relationship as a sacred one, and to bring silence, a deep silence and listening into our discourses.
Yeah, and I think what we're really, and you said that, you pointed that out really well, is that what we're really experiencing now is that we are experiencing our need to practice mercy, to lean into mercy, to make space for not being okay. I always like to tell people that every one of us has a right to be in process, to be baking, to take time to put our best self forward. And one of the things that we're starting to be forced into realizing is that because of our crisis of our planet, of discovering new viruses and all the different things that are happening in our world, is we're starting to be forced to realize that we have created a lot of false narratives and false constructs that we have been comfortable with. And what we're being faced with is the truth of reality, that we need each other, that solidarity will save the planet, and how we find that is through beauty. Dorothy Day actually often said, she's not the original person that said this, but she quoted it a lot, was that beauty will save the world. Because beauty reminds us of our connectedness to everything that's happening, and to one another. It also teaches us our best self. When we look upon a beautiful painting, we not only admire it because it's aesthetically pleasing, we admire it because it brings something out of us. It brings our deeper self. It brings our truer self. And I think our crises that we're having right now are really forcing us to do that. And part of what's happening with people is they've never been aware of that part of who they are. So they're kind of uncomfortable with it, And so having books like this and your other books, Original Blessing, The Cosmic Christ, the writings of Howard Thurman and other people really, I think, are teaching us how to fall in love with ourselves, in a healthy way. And fall in love with our planet, because as we're a part of it, whether we like it or not.
Right. And we're a pretty precarious species, actually, that, we're on the verge of annihilating ourselves along with so many other species. We're in this extinction spasm, and there's a lot of denial going on, and sort of life as usual, business as usual, religion as usual. But that's not going to cut the mustard. There's something much deeper being demanded of our species today. And I'm glad you brought in the whole theme of beauty, because that was very important to Aquinas, as it is to all pre-modern thinkers. Yeah. The indigenous people, the Navajo people, so many of their prayers are all built around beauty and God as beauty. In Aquinas, we wrote a chapter in this book on Aquinas' teaching that God is beautiful, super beautiful, and that all beings participate in the divine beauty. So just that is utterly postmodern, because the modern era threw out beauty as a ethical category and even a philosophical and theological category. And yet Aquinas is one of his favorite names for the divine is beauty, and that we're here to create more beauty, to bring more beauty into the world. That is what our creativity is for, not to bring more bombs and weapons and ways to tear down rainforests in a day that it take nature 10,000 years to give birth to, but rather we're here to make beauty. And that has so many aspects to it. And so that is a big insight that is supported by Aquinas, but I'm glad you're picking up on it as a young thinker and activist as well.
Well, I think also, having a hermeneutic of beauty, having a mindset of beauty, I think really helps us to remember, it's easy to do the work of justice from the perspective of the negative, of like, everything's falling apart. I need to save the world. We need to bring everything together. And I like to sometimes joke with people that I'm not trying to save the world. Jesus already did that for me. I'm just trying to learn to live like that's true. Like we're already saved. We're born into salvation. We're born into the blessing of God. I'm just trying to claim that on my life, but we live in a society, in an economic capitalist society that teaches us the opposite of that. My friend, Father John Deere, priest activist, Catholic priest and theologian, he often talks about the fact that we live in a 24/7 classroom of violence every day, all day long. We're being taught to one-up each other, to be morally superior to one another, to always win and to get the best and to consume more than other people. And that's not the way of the mystic. That's not the way of the gospel. That's not the way of the big-hearted. The big-hearted ones give away, live simply, live in.
No, it's the way of the reptilian brain.
Yeah.
The reptilian brain wants to be number one, wants to be on top.
Yeah.
And that's really the path that we've been going down. And I think part of it is a toxic version of masculinity.
Yeah.
That says, the last one standing somehow wins.
Yeah.
But in fact, as you say, it's really about community and kinship. And survival is not about one person standing. It's about all of us. We all survive or none of us survives. Yeah. And we all resurrect or no one resurrects. So I think that takes us much closer to Jesus' teaching and also to just what it really means to be a human being. That, if you go back in our ancestry, the original humans survived as tribes, and it was the tribe that survived. It wasn't about just the individual. And part of the modern consciousness has been this rugged individualism that is debilitating to the soul and to relationships of equality and of course to the earth. So I think all this is being purged, you might say, in today's crises, including our relationship with nature and all its forms, and our yearning for military solutions, and are putting, what is it now, $56,000 a second into weapons around the world. This is what the human race is doing. It's complete folly. Yeah. And again, I think a crisis like this virus wakes us up and shakes us up. And that's, well, is this why we're here? There's no particular national title on this virus. The virus does not respect nations, national boundaries, and a wall will not defend you from the virus. So neither will weapons. So, I just think it changes the conversation in a potentially very profound way. And just as you say, that it's about working together and solidarity, and seeing that we do have common foes. The foes are not another nation or even another ideology. It's more like our foes are what the mystics all around the world have talked about for centuries: avarice, greed, envy, violence, militarism, and hatred, and projection. I mean, so the real enemies are within. And that's where the cleansing has to happen. And again, this is where Aquinas, I think, is so wise to build his ethics around virtues, because virtues are those habits within that we cultivate to render us more beautiful, more humane, more ourselves in the deepest sense. And they set us off from a lot of ideologies that can run away with our minds if we don't be careful.
Yeah.
Our tax dollars.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, and I think we overly invest in our society, financially, metaphorically, in every way, in trying to do quick fit solutions, you know, whatever gets it done quickly. But that's not what will, you know, that's not the answer. We have to be willing to go deep into this and commit to saying, we're going to go really deep into this. We're going to do it together. We're going to give birth to new possibilities. You know, I wrote that in the afterword, that we need to not allow external forces to keep us from giving birth to new ideas and new realities of global justice and cosmic oneness. That we need to, because that's what's happening. You know, there are people who are the prophets of our age, like Greta Thunberg, and the Extinction Rebellion movement, and many of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter movement, and so on. They're telling us this is the vision, this is the direction that we need to go. This is what God means when, this is the dream that God has for us, that we are the beloved community. And we're trying to get to that. But there are forces out there and presidents out there who are trying to keep us from living that dream fully. And so I think we really have to be brave and bold and say, no, we defy that. And I mean, for me and other people, that has meant, you know, getting arrested and causing a fuss. Because we have to be able to say, you know, no, you know, no, we won't go extinct because of you, because of your greed, you know. No, my body matters, therefore I deserve to have health care, you know. You know, we as we learn in this book, you know, Aquinas really taught the importance of knowing your self-worth, and knowing the worth of the planets, and
as he says, of cherishing your body.
Yes.
Because the body and soul make such a beautiful, well, as he says, a marvelous communion.
Yeah.
And so it's not about ignoring our bodies or putting our bodies down and so forth. And in that regard, he had so much courage, which is what you're talking about, moral courage, because really he was standing up to the entire patristic tradition, because all those people we call the fathers of the church, the theologians of the 4th, 5th century, were Platonists. And that means they were dualists, and they were also sexist, extremely misogynist toward women. And Aquinas turns his back deliberately, consciously, and purposely his entire life on that whole tradition. And he tells us this is why he chose Aristotle over Plato. And Aristotle was just coming into Europe at that time, thanks to the Muslims who were translating him into Latin and bringing him into Spain. So from that point of view, Aquinas just really stands out, both for his courage and his wisdom, because he insisted on non-dualism, which is really the core of feminism. Rosemary Luther says that's the essence of feminist philosophy, is non-dualism. And this is such a break from centuries of dualism that permeated the Christian consciousness, but which was not part of Jesus' consciousness, because the Jewish tradition did not buy into Plato, as did the early centuries of patristic theology in Christianity. So just from that point of view, Aquinas not only urges us to follow our conscience and to put justice forward, but he practices it. And he paid a price for it. He was condemned 3 times by 3 different bishops after he died, precisely over this issue of what they call then consubstantiality of body and soul, that is to say, of non-dualism about spirit and matter. So from that point of view too, I think that Aquinas is a wonderful guide and mentor for the struggles that we're facing today, and
Yeah.
including the struggle that Mother Earth is facing
Yeah.
at our hands.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the idea that we need to really call it what it is, you know, is that
Hmm.
this the relationship that we have right now with the earth is abusive, you know.
Yes. Yes.
And we need to repent from that, you know, um, and we need to be conscious of that because Mother Earth is being abused and she's not going to take it anymore. You know, that's what we're seeing right now. And ultimately, at the end of this, if we're going to be totally honest, the Earth will survive.
Mhm.
We won't. The Earth will, because the Earth will always win.
Mhm.
Because the Earth is older than we are and much more robust than we are. Um, so we're fighting a silly battle here. You know, it's
The
like,
Earth will survive, and we won't. But sadly, a lot of other species won't either. We
yeah,
will bring these down with us as we are doing. So that's sad too. Because I mean,
yeah.
what did the whales do wrong? They've been here 55 million years longer than we have. Why should
Mhm.
they go down with us, or the elephants, or the rainforests, and the rest? Uh, so in a way, and Aquinas talks about this. He says that one human being can do more evil than all the other species put together. So he's not unaware of our power, of our intellects, and our creativity. And this is why we have to be guarding against ourselves. And we
Mhm.
have to be steering our tremendous powers of intelligence and creativity in directions that are, well, sustainable
Yeah.
and not suicidal or homicidal or geocidal, which is what we're really living through, is a collective geocide today.
Yeah.
And I really see this as the, the crucifixion of the Christ all over again,
Mm.
because the cosmic Christ represents the divine and beauty in everything. And if we're bringing down all these marvelous beings, the rainforests and the elephants and the rest, along with our own species, well, isn't this a crucifixion story all over again? Isn't this Good
Yeah.
Friday and in squared? Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. But another theme that you bring up in the very first theme you bring up in the afterword is that of joy. And
Mhm.
I thought that was interesting that you kind of jumped on that right away, hearing that in Aquinas. Why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's what can I say? A theme, it's an energy, it's a virtue, really, that humans are capable of, that Aquinas is so excited about. He says that the human's great, noblest act is joy.
Mhm.
And how did that speak to you? Because it obviously did, because you got pretty.
Yeah, it was well, I remember reading that. I mean, and that particular line, the joy is the noblest act. And I meditated for that for quite a while because it really struck me. Because at first I thought, oh my God, I would never say that. I would never think that joy was the noblest act. I would think getting arrested was a noble act, you know, or confronting, injustice. I would say that would be a noble act. But I really thought that was just so inspiring that he would say joy. And so I went deep on it, and I really, took that and took it apart and tried to figure out where he was coming from. And it suddenly occurred to me how subversive that is, because really what happens is when you're in a state of joy, when you are experiencing joy, practicing joy, I think joy is more a verb than a noun. What ends up happening is everything is put into perspective.
Mhm.
Um, you get in touch with your true self, your true identity, which Henry Nouwen called being the beloved of God. That all of us are born the beloved children of God, or as you say, the original blessing. When you're in that state of joy, you know that, you're able to touch it, and that produces gratitude. It produces what the philosopher Ruskin talked about when he talked about the duty to delight. Um, it it makes you fall in love again. You know, and I write about that in the afterword, about when I was at the Food Not Bombs group we have in Houston. Food Not Bombs is an international movement of decentralized communities all over the world who give out free food to everybody, whoever's hungry, because everybody has the right to food and water. And so we practice that. And we have a very active group in Houston. We actually meet 4 times a week for 3 hours downtown. And we make homemade organic food, and we give it out to specifically to the homeless community, because we have a huge homeless community in Houston. But anybody who's hungry that happens to be around can come and eat. You know, and but we don't just give out food, you know, and then leave. You know, we stay and mingle, and we know people by name. We have relationships with them. You know, we're building the beloved community. And I remember one night I was there. It was actually, it was a few years ago during Lent. And I was out there, and I happened to end up just kind of mingling a little bit longer than everybody else. I was one of the last people left. And I was getting ready to order a ride share to go home. And at some point, I started hearing these sounds, and I looked up and I saw a group of young adult, primarily young adult homeless people who are unhoused, who were in their 20s and 30s. And I remember noticing them because they were all friends and they were all eating together. And I noticed them again, and they were just having you know, the best time. You would have thought they were at a party or something. And I was watching them, and I watched them for several minutes, and it suddenly occurred to me, like I had this mystical experience of, I felt like I had been transcended from this plane to an idea of what heaven was like. You know? And I suddenly realized that we facilitated this. You know? We facilitated this joy, which ultimately was the key that unlocked them from their social bondage for a moment. You know,
that's beautiful.
And so I just, when I was reflecting on this joy as the noblest act, that came to mind. And I remember thinking, oh, yeah. You know, Teilhard de Chardin said that the surest sign that God is present, that the Spirit is present, is when joy manifests. And that was a great example of that.
It's a wonderful example, and it's a wonderful example of the relation between justice and joy. As you say, you were making it possible for people to get together and eat, and therefore celebrate and share. And so joy is an outcome of justice. Because it's an outcome of love. It's a fruit of the spirit of love. And that's why, like Meister Eckhart says, what happens to another, whether it be a joy or a sorrow, happens to me. And that's his definition of compassion. That compassion is about living out our interdependence. And that interdependence includes struggling together, solidarity in the midst of struggle, bring justice where there's injustice, but it also means celebrating together. And that's what joy means. Joy is a gathering. Celebration is a gathering of the joy in people's hearts and our potential for joy. And so that's just a beautiful story and a concrete one, I think, of what Aquinas is saying. That joy is a human's noblest act. And then that in turn, you are seeing the joy of this circle of people brings joy to you.
Yeah.
And then it just keeps multiplying. And there's no limit to it. That's the wonderful thing about spiritual energy as opposed to just material things, that material things have their limits, but spiritual things do not. Because you have joy, you're not robbing me of my joy. It's just the opposite. Your joy triggers my joy, etc. And that's the wonderful thing about putting spiritual energy into practice, that there's no limit to it. That's where, and Aquinas talks about that. He says that's where humans are infinite in our capacity for making joy and beauty And truth, our pursuit of truth, it never stops.
Yeah.
And yet we have this tendency in our culture, a culture of rank consumerism and therefore materialism, of thinking, you know, somehow you're here to fill your house with stuff.
Yeah.
No, it's the inner house. Aquinas calls it the inner house of wisdom that that seeks joy and justice and the silence to share it and go deeply into it. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I think that one of the cool things about reflecting on that experience was that we, like I said, we facilitated that happening, whether we knew it or not.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when we start from that place of, like I said in the beginning, you know, of original blessing, of remembering who we really are, which is the beloved children of God, we realize what you talked about in chapter 4, that that the greatest gift of the human experience is that we're capable of the universe. We realize how much power we have, you know, and when we really, I think, to practice nonviolence and to be a people of justice making is just that. You know, we claim that power, we use that power, and place it towards the good, and then we facilitate the kingdom of heaven here on earth. You know, and then that really is the remedy to this idea of panic, of like, what are we going to do? How are we going to solve all this? Like, no, we don't need to panic. We have the power. We just have to tap into it and utilize it and be bold and say, you know, I like what that trend that was going around on social media, Maxine Waters, when she reclaimed her time in the Senate. I don't know if you've ever seen that video, but it's worth looking up. She kept trying to get, one of the Senate guys, white male, tried to keep shutting her down, and kept saying that she was going over her time. And she kept saying, reclaiming my time, reclaiming my time. And I think we need to do that. I think we need to reclaim our time. We need to reclaim our space. We need to reclaim our power and really dare to do like what we do in Food Not Bombs. You know, when we do our food sharings, we're downtown, we're at the public library, but we're actually in an area where it's mostly just like some benches and some stone things that people can sit on, but there's really nothing there. It's actually meant to be like a transitory space where people walk through in and out. But we actually transform it. We bring tables, we bring food, we bring friends. Once we had some live music. Sometimes we have people who are therapists and artists who can come and provide support. And you know, so I think when we realize this truth that we're capable of the universe, we realize where our power is, and then we can arrive, as it says in the book, that, you know, God's vision is arrived at through justice. You know, we get to that vision, we get a glimpse of it.
Right.
Yeah,
and your work for justice and healing is a pathway to the divine. It's that kind of pilgrimage and journey. And then again, Aquinas says, sure, joy is God's, and this demands companionship. So our joy mirrors a divine joy. It's an echo of the divine joy. And in fact, he's saying the whole universe exists because of the divine joy. That divinity wants to share the joy, and we're here to share the joy and to partake of it. So it's really a very short step from joy to justice, and from both to divinity. As he says, God is justice, but also sheer joy, it's God. So in the divine, he says really in divinity, there are only two attributes you can literally apply to divinity. One is love and one is joy. And of course, love is love justice. There's no love without justice.
Yeah.
So, I think that takes us right on on a spiritual journey into all of these practices that you're talking about, including, of course, the artists showing up and the effort through music and storytelling and ritual and the rest to gather the joy of people, bring it out, bring it alive.
Yeah.
That's what art can do. That's what music can do. That's what ritual should do.
Yeah.
And then you have an energy source so that you, like you say, is actually cosmic.
Yeah.
This is the energy of the cosmos, because the cosmos is not just sitting there. It's moving. It's expanding.
Yeah.
It's rapidly now, we know, giving birth. I mean, there's every 15 seconds, a new star is being born. My goodness. That's a lot of generativity going on. So we're invited into that same story and drama of birthing, creating, renewing, and creating joy, bringing joy alive.
Yeah, and that drama, that's a great word to describe it. Drama is that, it really is, it's commotion, it's stirring up, it's stirring up the magic, the mystique, the wonder, I know a lot of people who for a long time have been doing the work of justice, and they have many, many stories, but one of the things that they always said that kept them going was their commitment to doing beautiful things, of taking time to go and enjoy art, to go dance. I like Emma Goldman, who said, if I can't dance in your revolution, I don't want to be a part of your revolution.
Right.
I think of the civil rights movement and the movement for racial justice. All of the best protest songs came from those movements. King and Bayard Rustin and Howard Thurman and Audre Lorde and Ella Baker, all of them went to jail singing songs of hope, songs of courage, or if we go back further and go with, the Underground Railroad, that whole movement was driven by songs because that was how they got the message out, of where
Very
to go,
true. And there's the anti-war movement of the 60s, of course, also. Peter, Paul, and Mary, and Joan Baez and Bob Dylan and all that also, that the arts are necessary for carrying on of justice work. And in South America, this is really clear with the poets who are often leaders, and like, the Pinochet government, when it took over from the rightly elected democratic leaders in Chile, they went after the musicians. They went after the folk singers, cut their tongues out and so forth, broke their fingers so they couldn't play the guitar. This is a reality that, and it's true in any totalitarian state, that the arts have to be controlled. And this is what can I say? It should tell us how important art is, and artists and the work they're doing and the prophets were all artists. Some of the greatest poetry we have comes from Isaiah and Hosea and Jeremiah, that because to see deeply, you see into the human soul. That's where the aged, and that's where the struggle comes alive. And so to pierce that, you have to reach other people's imaginations. And that's what the prophets do. They speak imagination to imagination, because as you were talking about, the future isn't here yet. The future of justice is in our imaginations. And Jesus too, you know, he didn't live a life of a theologian. He lived the life of a storyteller and a wanderer and a poet. And that's how he chose, as the other prophets did, to disturb people and to awaken people. And again, I think of course, the artist world, creativity can itself be co-opted by the same forces. Instead of giving birth to poetry that enlightens people and empowers them, you can give birth to poetry, so-called poetry, that sells more cars, refrigerators, and military weapons. So, I mean, every human being has to continually be self-critical of what they're using their gifts for and who's profiting from it, and whether it's good for the earth and good for future generations, or whether it's serving other purposes, whether it's fame or ego or big corporations, or those who are part of the problem when it comes to saving the earth as we know it, or as distinct from those who are working to heal it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, this whole trust in war and in weapons and in police forces and things like that is, we're putting our trust into temporary fixes, I guess you could say, but they're really not fixes, they're destruction. you know, and we have replaced God, the divine, with war and with weapons, and we've allowed our religion to be mutated into being, worshiping the God of destruction, and which is not the God that is represented by any of our prophets or mystics, and or by the arts themselves. So I think one of the ways that we confront that is, like we said in the beginning in that song, newer rights must be recognized, and we must surrender old rights and learn new practices of how do we practice this democratizing of the sacred, how do we practice arriving at the vision of God, which is justice.
And Aquinas speaks to that too when he talks about the same spirit that hovered over the waters at the beginning of creation, we would say today the fireball, is working in the minds of artists at work. So that certainly puts our creativity into both a cosmic setting, but also a divine setting. That's how special human creation is, that we are, the Holy Spirit is carrying on this same spirit that launched the universe, is yearning to invite us with our intelligence and our creativity, our imaginations, to create a world that's worthy of us and worthy of all the beauty that exists here. So it's such the opposite of idolatry, of worshiping these gods that eat their children, like Kronos. Instead of that, to be worship, to be honoring the Holy Spirit at work through us, through us, not just as individuals, but as communities and as a species. What we could be doing in terms of us setting the future on pillars of justice: economic justice, racial justice, gender justice, eco-justice, gender preference justice, what we could be doing to make our species sustainable and render the planet, as we know it, sustainable again. To me, that's the big invitation. But to do it, we have to get over these idolatrous temptations we have to serve the gods of consumerism and of power over, and of I win, you lose, and of militarism, and of patriarchy, and of homophobia, and all these other temptations that we are subject to as human beings and as communities and as nations and the rest.
Well, I'm curious because I know we're coming to a close here. This has been really lots of fun. That's one of the chapters actually in this book that I was really happy to see. Was where is it? Where's the table of contents? Oh, here it is. One of the chapters in this book, which I was happy to see, was about playfulness. Playfulness or fun is a virtue. I think that's really, really quite interesting. One of my favorite books of yours was your book on prayer. I have the original version, though. It talks about being a mystical, musical, dancing bear. I like that one because that the cover of the book is just so fun and playful, and the name is just so adorable. And I think that this has been lots of fun, and fun is a wonderful virtue to keep practicing because it helps us not to be too serious.
Right.
It
The
doesn't.
more serious the work, the more you have to underscore that with playfulness.
Yeah.
And playfulness is about creativity, imagination too. As Jung says, there is no creativity without play and fantasy. So that's part of everything we've been talking about this whole hour.
Yeah.
So I thank you very much. It's been fun, as you say, and I hope those who have access to this conversation will derive some fun from it as well as other benefits.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to end actually by reading one more thing from the afterword. And I also want to give a shout out that if anybody likes what we've been talking about, they obviously should get the book. I think we have an audio version coming out soon. Certainly for people who don't like to read, they want to listen or don't have time to read.
Or if they're in traffic and can't read.
Yeah. But also I think, it's fun to, another way to practice fun is to learn and to learn with other people. So I have this little flyer for our certificate program for people if they're interested in that with Global Ministries University. They can go to your website to learn about that. I'm going to be teaching with Theodore Richards on that. So if they want to learn from me, they can sign up. But yeah, this has been lots of fun, and I cherish your wisdom and your leadership on this, and I appreciate you including me on this. I hope you don't regret it.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
I appreciate your own wisdom, and and you're walking your talk and doing what you do as well as thinking what you think. So
well,
thank you very much.
Well, I want to end with this, and then we can run off and do the work. So this is from the afterword. It says, "Our marching orders are clear, and the path has been set for us. We do not have the luxury of time to allow external forces to keep us from giving birth to new realities of global justice and cosmic oneness. We must embrace the beautiful wisdom in this book and get to work."
Well said. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Keep on keeping on.
Okay, Dennis.